Thank you everybody for coming along. I'm Paul Leonard. Talked a bit about forensic philately. There's nice friendly faces who I know from many years ago, etc. I'm excited to see some new faces. So in terms of what I'm trying to talk today about, this talk is sponsored by FIFA, so thank you FIFA for getting it organised. And specifically, you'll see when you walk in today that at the back we've got the latest cost-of-living machines for the BC 9000. What I'm talking about is the 8000 machine. Danielle is standing up for the lanyard. She's the lady helping me. So if you brought any material today, we're more than happy. So I'm going to talk possibly about 50 minutes, no more than an hour. But we've certainly got another hour or maybe more this afternoon. Specifically, if you've got items with you which you want to talk through with us like a one-to-one, collectively, I'm very happy to find help. So the idea of my talk is, first of all, to acknowledge the fact that there's lots of members of the Royal who've contributed to this. I get involved with the expert committee, and Tobias, who's back now, he and I have worked together over various uses, not just of the post-treatment machine, but other techniques such as Photoshop. And crucially, the whole aspect of this is I enjoy doing the research on forensics. So I work with a lot of the UK universities, which you're going to hear a little bit about. So I'm going to the lucky chairman who's got all the technology. We're going to try and change the slide. So we see how much of this technology works. Right. But next bit thing. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the work of the expert committee. Primarily, obviously, what's happening in the Royal, but obviously there are other expert committees around the world who we obviously collaborate with. Is that it? Next bit. Thank you. So I'm going to try and talk about the whole aspect of forensic philately and how far we've actually got from a scientific point of view, and also the importance, obviously, of reference collections, person's knowledge, and so forth. Next one, please. And then I've got Tony sitting down the front here as my victim from Royal Mail, but I'm very grateful that he is here because I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we did with the BBC last year, and hopefully that will be useful. And then if you just move on again, please. And then Bill Barrell, who may turn up in a while, he's representing the Trade Society Limited, and I've got some material which he gave me, which I'll explain about. And finally, is the ongoing research. So move on to the next bit. So we had the Queen, our late Queen, coming over to new premises at Church Lane. It's a lovely facility. If you're not able to visit it this week, by all means try and come see us. The library's fantastic. We've got some really good facilities there. And there's another seat over here, or we can get some more chairs in. That's victims of success. So anyway, there was Chris Harman, obviously using that. Now, this stamp here is one which I submitted for exercising with the expectation that I would get a good certificate, but I'm going to try and explain some of the things which actually go on. You'll notice that it's a New Zealand stamp used in about 1900, but down the bottom here has an overprint which says Newry. And of course, these early stamps of Newry were extensively forged. It's probably worth about £300 or £400. So if we move on again, so if you submit anything to the Royal, you may have had dealings with Lucy or Tracy. But the crucial thing is that if you're the submitter, you're actually providing the information which will then be judged how relevant approaches. That obviously steers us. Then as a person who does the first check, it's usually Ian Harvey, who have to look at these things, and then they start looking at their reference books. And crucially, we then ask the volunteers to see whether we've actually seen it before. And this is quite important because we've now seen about 240,000 items. So quite often, if these things are charismatic, we may have seen it before, therefore we look back at what's actually done that. Then once the volunteers have sorted that out, we then further check in terms of how that's coming together. And then you may be one of the people that we actually use as a consultant, because like all these things, none of us know it all. A lot of us are very specialised in certain areas. And crucially, the consultants obviously add value to what's actually happening here. So all that gets pulled together. So if you're moaning about the fact that the missing item is taking it around, 2 months, 6 months, etc. Don't blame me, but the understanding for it is a lot of this consultation business is going on before the expert committee looks at it. Okay. So if we now move on to the next slide, please. This is obviously us at work last month. Peter Leslie, Harvey, Chris Harmon, Tim Harrison, and have you met President yet? So those are the key people. That's Thomas, I'm going to show you there. Next slide, please. So here's my item which has been submitted. If you've actually submitted one, this is the sort of format that comes back on. I'll just read out what it says. URI 1902 SG1, one of the Carline standard New Zealand hand stamped B1 bluish green U. Now this is the bit that people get upset about, which is why I got upset about. It then says soiled margin. Now I don't have a great problem with that because when you think of the age of the stamp, that's probably broken. But if obviously you're a dealer, you're not going to be happy with the fact that it's probably not, of that 50 quid off the value of the stamp, because suddenly they're saying, oh, it's only got soil margin. So there are lots of challenges in terms of the way that these things are written up, which I think, to be fair, this is obviously signed by Chris Harmon. That's what the committee agreed. And obviously, if you think you don't have a soil margin or anything else, well, you can obviously debate that. But the important thing is that's what the certificate is saying at that moment in time. Okay, 5th of March this year. Okay, moving on again. Right. Of course, I had to put up this slide, but don't worry, keep smiling, because I think all of us who collect stamps, we've got that challenge of where can we actually find things. Equally, are we going to be disappointed when we think we found something which is very rare, and then somebody turns around and says, whoops, no, it's not quite the same. So the main message is, don't worry, keep smiling. If we've got more evidence, we'll obviously take that on board, and that will all help the idea of where we are. Next slide, please. So this is basically showing you 2 examples from different submitters. These are ones which we saw in the last 10 years. You'll notice that this one says after comparison. So quite often these things will be sent out to consultants who've got a reference collection, and they'll compare with their reference collection with the items submitted. And then this one over here says after consultation, where somebody who's a consultant specialist for that particular area has gone through it. So this is basically talking about how that's been done. This is obviously been signed. Here's genuine that one. This one, as you'll see, has several signatures, which basically says as a forged search. Okay, next slide. This is one which this is the first stamp I ever submitted to the Royal when I first joined, which I think was about 2009. And I suppose the main thing to say is this whole business about the signing being genuine. This is definitely genuine, but as you can see, it's rather a tired stamp. It's perforation. Now, of course, we see some people who are capable of actually adding large perforations here. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is Thomas is providing some of this material for Doc Holmier. So these are examples which came out of his collection. And basically, of course, it's the fact that we'll start off with a genuine stamp, but then somebody decides that they're going to manipulate it from a fraudulent point of view to potentially make it more valuable. Clearly, we're into penny blacks. A lot of these things, particularly in terms of the colours, the blues, greens, various other things, in theory are quite rare. People will fiddle around with them. So if we move on again, please. Okay, so these are the people who I mentioned earlier. Chris Harmon, I suspect both people as the chairman. Thomas, who's up back at the moment, he's this guy sitting here. Peter, Ian, Simon again, and Tim. The reason I'm showing you this photograph is this is just showing you a small selection of the reference material. Each of these paper copies in the last 12 months we've actually had scanned. These are the worksheets, photographs, and so forth, so that we can look at these things, but they're divided up by different countries, different years, different printings, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. This is just a quick bit of history for those of you who are sort of interested in the whole aspect of expertising. And as you can see, it was set up in 1894, where they decided that they needed an expert committee because of the fact of stats needed to be submitted for them. And that's quite important because obviously at that stage, bearing in mind we're talking 1894, there was a lot of frauds being committed, and obviously collectors wanted the reassurance that there was evidence of the certificate. The either said it was fraud. So the early people at the Castle, Bacon, and Evans down here, and obviously there were various books produced by the Royal, which told you more about that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a rather busy slide. Tells you that we had about 50 people who are actually on the expert committee. And the crucial thing is, I've said, we have lots of consultants, well over 100 people who specialise in quite often esoteric subjects. And crucially, the whole aspect of this is very labour intensive. It's not a 5-minute job. If I'm doing something for the BSc, I always allow at least half an hour. You may say, stick it on here, and what's the answer? Well, that's not the, it has to be calibrated, checked, and so on and so forth. So the important thing is that you've got a robust scientific approach to doing the work. And here's Lucy's. I met her, and a little while ago, prior to Stockholm, this guy wrote quite a nice article telling you more about the sort of work that we do. Next slide, please. So here she is actually doing the work. Here's Tracy here, Peter. I think we're going to be putting this on the web sometime. I think they're recording what I'm saying, so you have another chance to actually listen. But this link in blue actually takes you into the experts area of the website, so you can spend more time looking at it. Okay, now we come down to the what you might call all the expert committee students. It's just a reminder of that thing they do. So the crucial thing is, you see it says material needs to be assessed by comparing reference material. So this one says British Library. So there are obviously collections which we have access to. We occasionally go to the British Library, occasionally go over to look at what is now the King's collection. And there are obviously other specialist collections which we actually have in the Royal, which we can refer to. So what Ian's doing now is he's obviously got the item he's looking at, and he's now trying to find whether we've found that further information. Most of you will be very familiar with the Scots and various other catalogues like that, which again we obviously use. Now, the other thing to say, of course, is don't assume that the catalogues are 100% correct. Quite often the information may be appropriate, but equally part of the enjoyment of working at the Royal is trying to understand how they actually assess that. And if obviously there's further information which becomes available, we obviously then contact the publishers, and quite often they will then issue further information next edition. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the sort of what you might call standard stuff all experts use. So a high power magnifying glass, tray for doing watermark protection here, and obviously things like vibration gauges, which I'm sure you probably use at home. Okay, next slide. Another busy slide. So what it's basically saying is that when you submit an item, we call it a patient, and then it gets mounted in folders like this guy here. When I started, it was well over 200,000. As you can see, we're now over 240,000. So there are a lot of things to be checked. Equally, we're still working, obviously, on having a searchable database. A lot of this is obviously paper-driven, but in certainly the last 12 months, all the worksheets have now been scanned. And those of you who take the London Atlas may have seen that we're advertising for volunteers to come and actually use the scans and photographs. So there's lots of things going on which we obviously would like to make it what I call fireproof and waterproof. Because if we obviously had a fire or a big leak, we would lose an awful lot of paper-based management. Okay, so I've explained about the initial examination, and then we usually meet every 6 weeks. The crucial thing to say is all the members of the expert committee, they obviously have a chance to see that everything has been submitted. There'll be some form of discussion one-to-one with what they think, and then obviously there's further general discussion before eventually that's all pulled together, usually by either Ian Harvey or by Chris Harmon, and then that is the way that that would be written up. But quite often we've got maybe 300-400 plus items to look at in a day, and obviously it just depends. I'm only seeing maybe 20% of those type of things. If they tend to be fairly complex covers, which I would not do now. If they're fairly straightforward things, they wouldn't be scanned by a lot of people. They would be a consensus fairly quickly. But the important thing is to say that it is an opinion. Crucially, all the expert committees around the world, they all have opinions. Part of the enjoyment I have is obviously liaising with the Green Foundation, people in Germany, obviously people in Canada, and so forth. So there's lots of things which, from my point of view, it's good to see where the good guys are and how we can actually help in the future. So we meet every 6 weeks, and then, as I've said, we go to Britain, to the British Library, and try to look at our collection. But I highlighted here the opinions and opinions, and expert committees do not always agree. That's an important point. You know, I'm quite comfortable with the whole aspect of this is the information you have at this period of time. If you as a submitter or others out there feel that you've got things which are controversial, well, obviously it's good to be able to chat through those things and then try to ascertain why. Okay. So this is what you might call the day job for all the experts. Thank you. Right, so clean stamps masquerading is unused because obviously the price differential, particularly with penny black. So you've got maybe a penny black, let's say £200 with a nice one, which is mint, could be worth, any idea? 10 grand. So there's a good idea for fraud there. Okay, colours, distinctive postmarks, they're all very relevant. We do spend a lot of time on that. The margins, there are some amazing people out there who are able to manipulate the fibres of the paper so that therefore, if corners are missing, that they've been added and so on. And then, of course, the crucial thing is stamps that don't originate on cover. I brought one along which I can show you what's later about that. And there, of course, we've got rare perforation, boulettes, and pins, and so forth. So that's a very specialised area. But clearly, if there's fraud, money to be made out of it, it'll happen. Right. Now, who knows what this is? Absolutely. So the Spiro brothers, and I just put this up as what you might call a classic example. If the Spiro brothers were here today, they would say, it's not a forgery, it's an artwork. And I'm using that just as one example, because the crucial thing is, you can say, well, what's your perforations like here? They're pretty hopeless. Clearly, this sort of sewing technique here is not too good. And obviously, if you collect Bahamas, well, who wants to collect Bahamas with a very wishy-washy method? Now, the crucial thing that gives most of these things away, besides what I've already said, is obviously this cancellation, which is what we call the standard Spiro. Now, they specifically obviously wanted to appeal to certain collectors. You can argue that they were very successful fraudsters, and equally, from our point of view, you could submit this as a genuine forged Spiro, genuine materials. So you then get into an expert committee, get into this dilemma of, yes, it is forged, it is, etc., but it's probably a Spiro. And there are obviously well-known forgers, Sperati, Adam Joseph, so forth. So if we move on again, thank you for that. Right, so back to the day job. This is Peter Lister, basically hard-working guy. And as you can see, we've got photographs. They spent an awful lot of time on what you might recently call admin. Some of the things which obviously we have other volunteers to do. But the main thing, of course, is being able to track where your item is and obviously what specifically first and so forth. So, as I say, we're now in scanning the digital archive. Next one, please. So this is just from my own collection. They're not super valuable, but they're here as an aid just for me to explain what's going on. So, of course, Mauritius, of course, they obviously thought this is a good idea. This very valuable old stamp. We can stick it on that nice one from George VI, 1947, and then we can flog it off to stamp collectors' stamps. And then this one here, as you can see, it's obviously Canadian, 1939 from the Canadian Banker Company, and a nice item in itself, a corner. And those of you who are into modern philately, here's a fairly standard work of Beatles, which obviously is. Move on to the next bit. Now, this is the bit that interests me. I'm not suggesting this is forged, but just using this example. So here's my Canadian stamp. And what I'm doing, all I'm interested in at the moment, is to actually just look at the perforation and what diameter they are. Okay, so I get that, take it over here. What I'm doing is I'm actually clicking on various points around the hole and then measuring it. Now, I hasten to add, any of you who are statisticians will immediately say, you've only done it once. I'm very conscious as a scientist of obviously trying to explain that I could do more and all the rest of it. But this is just for a demonstration. So what I've done is I've measured these four perforations. So lo and behold, I found 0.51, 5.48, 4. Now, the crucial point I'm trying to make is that we're dealing in millimeters here, quite a small unit, and therefore it's not the tenth of a millimeter, we're dealing with hundreds of millimeters. That's quite important when it comes down to the exercise. Possibly be very good at measuring these very small amounts. Next slide, please. So here's just a standard Beijing 24. This is obviously the genuine one. But again, even at that, you know, whether you're sitting at the back, you look at the quality of the prints here and the quality there, it's very wishy-washy. And if you go on to the next one, so here I've obviously enlarged it to about 30 times. And again, this is obviously coming back to your, and so you can see the drag from the way that it's actually printed on the official one, and the rather fuzzy image which the fraudsters are trying to get away with. If you're looking at these things quickly, it is fairly easy to be fooled by them, and then Royal Mail, of course, get upset when their machine reads it and says, that's not very good. But if we move on again, so these are just standard items. I've got back there, very well to have a look at them. You know, nice covers, what I would call straightforward in the sense that you can see that this one says first flight Durban to Johannesburg, South African stuff, nice Durban cancellations here, the feeding marks. I've blown up one here. And what I can do is actually measure the diameter of each of these, look at the height of the letters, and all those sort of things. And then maybe strobe one on top of the other, because if people started adding value, they think it's more appropriate for that item. That is where we start the alarm bells running. Next slide, please. So this is just showing that the fact that we obviously get a lot of these stamps which say mint. I think I've probably seen, I purposely picked this one so you can see it looks dirty or worn or aged, you know, soil. There's lots of phrases to use. And then this one over here is just showing the fact that the spectrometer will obviously bring out attributes. That doesn't look very exciting, but just to show you that the spectrometer has different wavelengths, different attributes, particularly in terms of physical use, which I'll come on in a minute. Okay, next slide. Right, I thought I had to, bearing in mind the excitement between Mr. Trump and China, it was only fair for weeks. So these are the 1939 stamps celebrating 150th anniversary of the USA Constitution. And what I liked about these is that you can see the super cancellation of Shanghai, and there's quite a reasonable Chinese one, which you can probably read. What is frustrating is why is the most expensive stamp the one that's got the most hopeless cancellation on? And from an alarm point of view, you start thinking, well, has that been filled around? Now, I'm not an expert, I guess, on these particular stamps. What we would do is we'd go to the reference material, we'd look at the reference, what specifically the jobs show these kind of cancellations. Are they appropriate for that time? Would they have been used in Shanghai? Lots of other things that we might imagine to look at. These have not been submitted for exercises, and I've just used those examples. It's quite frustrating when people will say, oh, it's the first day of issue. And there's no way that you can actually easily work out what's going on. Tobias, I just wanted to bring Tobias like this because obviously Photoshop is a good way of. Tobias and I have obviously worked together on some of these what you might call irritating stamps, and where the BFC cannot help, the Photoshop can. And I think it's nice little big page. Thank you. So this is just an ordinary postcard, another Chinese item with a stamp on it. Now, I'm going to say the stamp has been stuck on. It's not been cancelled. So therefore, presumably, somebody bought this postcard and thought, oh, I might get that to post it. Never got that to post it. And what we don't know, of course, is whether it ever originated on the cover. It's impossible to say that. So here's the front of the postcard. The reason that I've now showing you what I'm pointing to now is there's obviously many different techniques of postcard production and other printing techniques, but this shows you the way that in this sense, the photographic method they use, this is the sort of detail you get at 30 times or so. But quite often where we've got material from the raw mail, where we've got people using laser printers, not matrix printers, those are the ones which we start thinking, it's been done a bit like this. So there's relevance to that. Probably Wilkinson, they produce lovely stamps all over the world. These examples were produced specifically to demonstrate their publicity. But what I found somewhat surprising is that when they released them, guess what? There's a flaw there, which if I was Mr. Bradbury or Mr. Wilkinson, I don't think I'd be very happy with that. And equally, this one, you'll notice they're not the same. But this one here has got a rather nasty scratch down here, which I'm showing there. So these are the sort of things which we would look at in detail, specifically about whether the item is genuine in all respects. And it's very complicated because when it says genuine in all respects, what does that actually mean? So I'm just using that again as an example. Next, right. We get people who also stamps which have been used or cleaned, or specifically that they've then been re-gunned. Now, if you happen to be working in a hot tropical climate, you may well, of course, have had your stamps which would get stuck down the termites way as well. So I've just used this stamp example whereby hopefully you can see from a different discoloration on here how somebody has re-gunned this stamp and the gun is actually now leaking across the stamp. So you can then detect it on there. So you know that this did not originate with the original gun, it has been re-gunned. Okay, next question. Who knows what this is? So I looked at this 2014, this is when we were at Deptford Place. And well, what was interesting to me is that when obviously they turned up with it, there were two security staff standing behind me, watching my every move, so I couldn't do the double shuffle. So the one that you've got here now, I think is still genuine. But obviously, when it came through, they were obviously after a genuine certificate. And when the Queen turned up, Chris Harman and I had a lot of fun, of course, doing some of her stuff. But we're pleased to know that we gave her a genuine, so we didn't end up watching the tower. But you know, when you get these charismatic stamps coming in, obviously it's a great responsibility to try and understand how they've been fiddled around with. And as you probably know, these things have been signed by various wash owners and all the rest of it. And it's a fairly interesting stamp, but not all stamps that we particularly want to have in our collection. Maybe a problem. Next one. Right. Now, coming back to the fossil-free machine, we quite often get these high-value stamps. This one is from Zanzibar, and people are very clever at cleaning stamps. So, at a certain wavelength, this would have been purple colour, and it's obviously been used for a fiscal purpose. The crucial thing was that the people who are actually doing this have discovered how to clean the stamp. And so I routinely get asked when I go to the Royal, has this had a fiscal on it before it's been changed? And there are lots of examples where if you've got a high value stamp, particularly if they've got Africa or around Africa, that's when the alarm bell starts ringing. So using just to show you that image is the same stamp that John Shaw and I wrote an article about this a while ago. Crucially, not only have they cleaned that off, but they've even gone to the trouble of getting a perfectly plausible, shall we call it, cancellation, which makes it look genuine. And unless you can actually test it from a scientific point of view, going through things I'm describing, you could end up whereby you're paying a large amount of money for a stamp, which is a fraud. Okay, so I'd actually been working back in 2023 on the barcoded stamps which Royal Mail were producing, and I was asked by Chris Harmon to come to the Royal because this guy, Matt Albright, and his camera friends wanted to turn up. They wanted to film us talking about stamps, and particularly obviously the barcodes. So this is what I call helping Royal Mail, and go on to the next bit. Thank you. So I had friends who lived locally, and they'd been going onto eBay, and they'd been buying these 50 sheets of first-class stamps. I think they were paying about 15 or 16 pounds, which to them, of course, was a bargain. But the reason I've got Tony down front here is that we know where affordable is coming from. And the crucial thing about these particular stamps is I got various analysis done by another firm called Keans, obviously wrote with Foss and Freeman. And if we move on to the next slide, here we go with the different printing methods. And when we actually start looking at these, the 50 forged stamps, what the thing is, you could get out the sheet and you could actually scan each of the barcodes, and each of those barcodes was different. It was amazing. Okay. The but was, if you bought 2 of the 50 sheets, they were the same. But of course, most people don't buy it. I think in good faith, I can get away with it. Well, no, on that basis. So to me, it was a clever forgery. And Tony was talking to me yesterday. Chinese couldn't care less as long as they're making money out of it. That point. But what I wanted to be able to do was to demonstrate to people that at the Royal Philatelic Society, we have the knowledge, we have the focus to be able to say, yes, these things are forged, and therefore they should be used. And move on to the next slide. So here's the example of genuine ones. If you've got a good times 20 or so magnifying glass, you can see exactly what I'm showing here. So we've got this sort of drag that is also this speckled in here. Now, if I show you the next slide, which is the forged one, look, you can argue that the Chinese ones are better because they're a third line rather than a dotted line. But the main message is obviously they're using a different printing technique, which is easy to do. Now we go on to the next one. Thank you. Sorry, you want me to do that. Okay. So if you just go back again. Right. So what people were getting upset about is that they bought these things in good faith, and of course the Royal Mail, to be fair, Royal Mail picked up some of these things, but certainly when the machine started working, they were not picking all of them up. And I was picking things up that they were not, and various of them. But it's all history now, because the crucial thing was that people were being told how to stamp. He obviously, that Albright came along and said, how can we actually take these sort of things? And crucially, I obviously provided the evidence which said there are things which are wrong. I've just briefly touched on those, but I spent a lot of time on this. And then this went out on one show in April last year. About 2 million people watching it. And crucially, Royal Mail then came up with this app, really good app, which basically I think the fraud has diminished. You can't say it's disappeared, but obviously I'm interested in helping Royal Mail. That's one of the reasons why I was keen that I can just sort of touch on these as one of the examples that we as philatelists are interested in trying to do a good job in that program. Right, moving on to the next one. This is the Bill Barrel one. Those of you who went to Stampex, you may remember he recorded a video, or a guy, one of his friends recorded this. But crucially, he's now had over 75,000 views of this particular video. So when this is on the website, again, check on that. The video, I think, lasts about 40 minutes. But again, Bill's obviously a very respected dealer, very knowledgeable about these things. So if I now move on to the bit. So this is basically the same envelope. It's been used on this side and then it's turned over. And then, so the people who put this fraud together have got these 4 penny blacks. They're all plate 6. And at the time, of course, you could argue that individually maybe the stamps would be worth, I don't know, let's say £500, but on cover they could be worth £2,000 or £3,000. But the crucial thing was that they wouldn't fool anybody. And the reason I'm showing you these is just a nice example of how we work together. So Bill lent me this colour, which I've got over here. Okay, so if you now go on to the next slide, please. So here's the stamps with the Maltese cross on. He used hydrogen peroxide to clean up the stamps, which obviously made the Maltese crosses look a little clearer. What I obviously did was to enlarge these and also to look at various things like the tears and so forth. So if we were actually writing this up as a certificate, we'd actually be saying that there is obviously various damage to these items. Just move on to the next bit. So this is where other techniques such as retro reveal, image sleuth or Photoshop, which I've already mentioned. So these are different techniques which we can actually use to enhance different aspects of the stamp when we're trying to work out what we have to do. But the crucial thing to say about these particular items is that there is no tie between the four stamps and the envelope. And that's why obviously Bill was keen to float them off and then talk about it. So this is something we happily collaborated on, and it's nice to work with the PDS. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the stamps, which in this case I've just put some UV light onto it, which enhances some of the aspects of the Maltese cross. And then what I'm doing now is I'm shining a light from this side across the stamps, and now you can see how they've got dented and buckled and so forth. So you can see why, from a fraud point of view, it's worthwhile trying to get these onto an envelope, because potentially somebody might be thinking, oh, that's a nice lock and it's on an envelope. But the reality was, it was just a poorly put together fraud which would fool many people. But it's an interesting story. So there you go. Next one. So these are some of the esoteric things. So I'm now calling this ongoing research. All right. Right. So these are the sort of things which exercise my mind and the people at the Royal Laboratory. So, for instance, you'll notice that this French stamp is obviously perforated, but what I'm most interested in is they've obviously got a very sophisticated perforation machines, which can now obviously do all these weird gates. And what interests me, of course, is obviously the shape of the perforation and whether that might be forged. I've not seen any forged items on that. And then, of course, we get stamps with holograms. And when I was talking to Danielle before we started, I brought some of these hologram ones on. I don't think we've ever seen one that's been put in for exploitation yet. But the crucial thing is we need to have a method to understand how the things are being printed and the appropriateness of whether it's a genuine one or forged. Okay, next slide. So just to prove that we do actually pay good money to Foster Freeman to calibrate the equipment. So if I get stuck, they're very good on get help, but we do have at least an annual calibration check from one of their engineers, so that it's unlikely that there would be a court case about things. But but the crucial thing is that we do have calibration information, and Daniel's also bought a calibrator, which you can see, which again is one that we use. Right, next one. So we are very lucky to have people who make generous donations in terms of providing equipment. A person provided this Leica microscope, which we use again for paper analysis. Very nice machine, which is linked to the Foster Freeman. Okay, thank you. And then this is where it starts getting really esoteric, and it's not the sort of thing that we would actually have at the Royal, because of the expense and also the fact that driving. So in this case, I was going to the University of Surrey, and what we were interested in there was looking at German banknotes and the fraud for getting these banknotes using this particular machine, and this was money which was actually been spent by our own research house. It's not specifically targeted at German banknotes, it's just the fact that obviously different security features are brought out by different technology. Next one, please. Okay, So the Keyance people who couldn't come today, they have a very nice 3D microscope, and this is the Mauritius printing plate, which I did a few years ago now. But again, what we're interested in is the actual height differential. Now, I've worked with Keyance more recently, where we've actually been looking at the different thicknesses of paper, because if you'll see when you're collecting paper, there are different obviously printing techniques. And what we're trying to do now is establish a method specifically to actually say within this range, it must be from that particular paper mill. Next slide, please. Okay, there you are. Chris, here's one of your playing at home. So people obviously approach us at the Royal and say, I'm really interested in developing some work in this particular area, in this case, the seals. I said, well, that's interesting because I'd like to actually test some of the things which we're doing with Foster Freeman. So therefore, they produced the 3D capability of the machine we've got up top there, and therefore these seals, which are quite difficult to photograph, but we were talking about this earlier. And crucially, you can now look at the image in a lot more detail. Next one. Right. Now, we haven't talked about shades. Wonderful subject. There's a lot of money to be made out of shades. I'm sure you can probably go on. So, women, not all women are different, but women have more cones in their eyes, and they're used by the garments industry specifically to actually detect colour. Men do not have the cones, okay? But most of the people who are doing exercises for shades are men. So, therefore, obviously, the thing that interests me is, can we actually come up with an international standard which will specifically actually help for accidents? So at the moment, the Royal has quite a few specialists who are so-called shade experts, okay, and they have reference collection. And there are other people, Hector, Trevor Harris, various other people, all of whom built up a big collection of these sort of things. And the thing that interests me, which probably interests you, is can they see the difference? Because it's all very well saying, here's my blue one, here's my slightly different blue one. The crucial thing is, can you actually tell what's going on? So up at Newcastle, I went up to see them probably about 3 years ago now, and then last year they came down and they came along with these tests. I don't know how much you can see at the back. They all look superficially the same, but they're all different colours. Okay, and if you look here on this here, these are very subtle differences. The idea is that they button them all up, and then they obviously say to you, now you can sort them out and just see whether you can actually aggregate, if you like, the darkest ones to the lightest ones. So, and some of you may have done colour blindness tests before, and these are sort of things which are used. But the thing that interests me, of course, is if we're doing colour shades, do the experts who provide the information have skill to determine these subtle differences? And that's quite important. Now, to be fair, there are people in the expert committee who I exposed what I just described, and the person I'm referring to now ended up with a very good score. So I've got to tell you who his name is, inside about it. But the main thing is that obviously, I think as part of grade, if you want to call it, having reassurance that these reference materials and submitted items are being prepared by a human being, okay, that gives you one aspect. What I would like to do, of course, is one of the reasons why I like to give this talk is we need to move forward with actually having technology which specifically will scan, say, this is the scar alarm. And of course, you're well aware that Gibbons and the Americans and so on, we all have different ideas of what these colours are, particularly when they go into the catalogue. And even if you buy the strips, you know, which you can get from Darwin and so forth, that is essentially a colour which has been defined by stamp collectors. And of course, what I'm moving towards now is actually working with the colour industry. So therefore, there will be a very boring long string of numbers, which will basically say, yes, this is the scarlet one, rose blue one, whatever else comes in. But the crucial thing is that there's no doubt the shades, the colours for stamp collectors is a very, very important area. just labelling the point now. Next one, please. Okay, so this is where we start getting into elemental analysis. This is something which I've been working with, in this case at the University of Warwick a few years ago, and lo and behold, what we detected was obviously bits of iron, other there, something. So it obviously depends where the papers come from, and potentially, of course, if you tell them what the papers come from, and therefore it's then used for the printing. So move on to the next slide. So here's an example of using micro XRM. But the main problem with this technique found is that we're dealing with a very, very small sample size. That's obviously you don't have a big area. But crucially, we were finding that if we're trying to explode it for any period of time, like half an hour, standard size flutter. So obviously, from the point of view of the flat plane, that did not work. So at the moment, it's ongoing. It's one of my frustrations that I would like to get a more definitive answer to what's actually here. So moving on again. So this is the most latest thing which you see we were doing last month. I went off to University College London, and this thing here is talking about phase contrast, which is basically using X-rays. And to hold the standard, so these are stamps which Peter Coburn, some North Warner material, which is very kindly lent me. So this is one of the stamps that we're going into this holder here. And then we're going to expose it to X-ray. So this guy is in charge of this department, and he knows that I've given this talk today, but quite importantly, we feel this is one of the ways forward. So if we go on to the next slide, this is where it starts getting complicated. So we're talking now about 200 microns and 1,000 microns. So not the sort of thing which you're going to be able to see without specialized. But you can actually see it does say British North there on it. And what the technician is doing is we're focusing in on certain areas which we're going to compare with the use one. So go on to the next slide. So this obviously there's a lot of information on this slides. The main thing is that the X-rays are showing that the ink is detectable, larger particles throughout, not in the index areas. So this comes back to the selvage and what that was printed with. And then the fiber, see the fiber structure is less detectable. The index area kind of blurry appearance, which you'd expect the forward material, because the forward material by definition has not got the same quality control as the official ones. And then obviously we're good. The stage we're at the moment is the fact that we're still trying to work out whether we can actually use this as a finished technique, because most of these techniques are going to cost maybe £1,000 to do. So therefore, one has to be fairly sure that what we're going to do is value for money. The other thing is, of course, that if we're exposing more items to these types of techniques, we don't want it to go up in flames, blow a hole in it, and various other things which could potentially happen. So, joking aside, these are techniques which obviously I'm working on at the moment. They are potentially of use to an expert committee, but you do need to have technicians to be able to drive the ship. Next one, please. So this is another one which we've done using a scanning electron microscope, where again we're looking at the fibers parts of the paper. And then lo and behold, we are available for a chat. I'm so pleased that so many people are making today. It's really interesting trying to tell you a little bit about what's happening. So if we move on to the next one. So I mentioned Lucy at the beginning. Obviously, if you have items which you want to have exercised, I've got some what's nice, leave that with us. But the thing I would sort of sign off with is there are lots of exercise committees, or lots of consultants, all of whom are obviously expressing opinion. Where I'm coming from is the weight of evidence. Hopefully, what I'm trying to say a bit more is helpful to you in terms of thinking about the weight of evidence. And I think it's good collecting, and we're going to have a demonstration so that you want to stay behind. But thank you again for listening.